One of the other big outcomes, not directly in the G20, but on the sidelines, was the announcement about the India, Mid East, Europe economic corridor. Now, some are calling this like a boat and rail initiative to take on China's BRI, or in some ways, the old spice route being revived to take on the Silk Route. So all the policy wonks are having a field day there. But is this in some ways an attempt to push back at the BRI? And how do you ensure that the projects that are built don't end up as white elephants, given that relations between some of these countries that are involved in this corridor are actually fraught and could change at some point in time in the future?
Well, look, my first comment would be that the project stands on its own merits. You know, I really don't think everything needs to be compared with China. You know, I mean, China does its thing; it's welcome to do it. But I think I as India don't have to do things because China is doing something. I as India have my interests, my rights, my ambitions, my opportunities, and my friendships. So you see all of this today in play. So what is it we are trying to do? We are really looking today at a favorable geopolitical landscape and trying to do something which the world of commerce has done for 2000 years, which is to take two very important parts of the global economy, Europe and India, or should I say India and Europe, in that order actually. And I mean, this was there. I mean, it's not something new. I mean, you read Roman history, you read Mauryan history. When, you know, even when people talked about the fall of Constantinople essentially blocked the land route from where? From India to Europe. Okay. If you look at this whole idea of Vasco da Gama and Bartholomew Dias, you know, history we learned at school. What was it about? It was a bunch of Europeans trying to find a way to India. Okay. So in that sense, I mean, you know, Indians should realize we actually have been at the center of the world. Much of the world actually did things in search of a route to India. I mean, of which discovering America was one of them. So for me, this has a very fundamental, centuries-old relevance, which is the more routes, better routes, user-friendly routes you can create for movements of goods and possibly people between two big economic centers, with everybody else benefiting on the way. There's an enormous logic to it. Now, could it end up like a white elephant? I don't think so, because I think there's a fundamental sort of viability to it, because if you look at the partners involved, these are all market economies. These are countries, you know, who would, by the very nature of their economy, would make a commercial viability assessment before proceeding on something. And today, the talks which Prime Minister had with the Saudi Crown Prince, I think, reaffirmed a lot of that. So I think it's the joint project of very hard-headed, very practical, very market-based countries who have the comfort to come together as a consortium to take this forward.
Let's spend a moment on the Saudi Prince's state visit to India. Stayed back an extra day. Now, the Modi government is unabashed about its Hindutva credentials, and yet has been able to wean away countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, UAE from Pakistan's tight embrace. How do you see this evolve from where we've reached?
You know, I would use somewhat different terms, not just as a political correctness, but really as a way, to my mind, of how we are perceived by our partners abroad. I think the Modi government is perceived as more authentically Indian, that these are people, you know, deeply rooted in their culture and traditions and beliefs, and are proud of it, and, you know, they are what they seem to be. in a lot of countries, especially in the Gulf, and that's my experience, it actually evokes respect. Because after all, in many countries, they're very comfortable being proud of what they are. So when they see today an India under Modi that is proud to be in Bharat, I think that resonates with them. So
was there any chatter around Bharat?
in the G20,
Bharat coming
in the
from?
G20, yes. I mean, I won't say there's chatter, but some of the participants, some of the leaders, some of the ministers, when we were meeting and talking about it, and it made sense to a lot of them, because remember, in many cases, I cannot right now quantify it, but I can give you numerous examples of countries who have a certain word which is used by foreigners to describe them, or which they use when dealing with the world, you can say, and words which and
exonym and endonym, right?
Huh?
Exonyms and endonyms.
Yeah. So you have, let us say, an obvious example is Japan, which is Nippon, or Hungary, which I'm familiar with, which is Majar or Sag. So people use their self-descriptions for themselves, because in many ways it's a very natural, after all, what would I would use a word with which I'm most comfortable. So if I am truly comfortable with my traditions and culture and heritage, I will use a word from that. If I have a discomfort with it, maybe I'll use some other word.